Why complaining destroys your mind and what to do instead. The slow poison of the voice within you, don't hear it at first. It doesn't scream. It doesn't curse. It doesn't throw things against the wall. The voice of complaint is quiet, almost polite. It whispers beneath your thoughts like a draft under the door. It tells you the day is already too long, that people should be better, that you shouldn't have to do all this. And you believe it, not because it's right, but because it sounds like you. That's how it begins. Complaint doesn't enter the mind as fire. It comes as fog. You don't notice when it arrives, but you feel it when it stays. It softens your posture. It steals your energy. It bends your view of the world without your permission. Soon you're not just complaining about things. You're becoming someone who needs to complain in order to feel something. A sharp edge in the dullness. A false control in the chaos. But here's the truth. Complaint is not release, it's reinforcement. Every time you complain, your brain doesn't let go of the problem. It makes the problem the center of gravity. You start training your mind to search instinctively for what's wrong. And it will always find it, because complaint sharpens the eye for flaws, not for facts. What was once a thought becomes a pattern becomes a personality. And that personality starts to color the way you see everything: relationships, silence, yourself. You no longer walk into a room and feel curiosity. You feel judgment. You no longer see the sun and think warmth. You think glare. You no longer feel discomfort and ask what can be done. You ask who is to blame. A mind ruled by complaint forgets how to ask better questions, and then something worse happens. You stop noticing that you're doing it. The voice becomes part of the architecture of your day. Like a background hum in an old building, it's always there. Not loud, but constant. You sit down to rest, and it speaks. You rise to begin, and it resists. You try to focus, and it pulls your attention to what you wish were different. You lose the present moment not because it's empty, but because your mind is full of everything it rejects. And yet, the world continues, indifferent. The sun rises, the rain falls, the people walk. The silence waits. And in the middle of it all is you, feeding a voice that builds nothing, risks nothing, and transforms nothing. A voice that knows how to wound but not how to heal. A voice that carries no discipline, only reaction. No principle, only preference. You weren't born with that voice. You learned it. From a world that confuses comfort with growth. From those who built their identity on what hurts them, not what strengthens them. From the constant stimulation that made you believe friction means failure. But now you know, and awareness is the beginning of authority. You must interrupt the pattern, not with violence, not with repression, but with stillness, with attention, with the quiet inner command that says, not this time. The complaint will rise, let it. Don't resist it like an enemy, observe it like a shadow, let it pass like a cloud. Speak nothing, move with clarity, do what must be done. Because in that moment, you remember who you are beneath the noise. Not the sum of your preferences, not a product of frustration, but a being capable of endurance, perspective, and power. Not through domination, but through discipline. To live without complaint is not to live without struggle. It is to face struggle with dignity intact. It is to carry pain without infecting others. It is to suffer and still choose silence over noise, action over pity, clarity over collapse. The voice within may not stop whispering, but it can lose its influence, and when it does, something else grows in its place. A deeper voice, one not built on fear or resistance, but on alignment with what is. That voice doesn't complain, it commands. It doesn't seek comfort, it seeks truth. And that is the voice you were meant to follow. The illusion of moral superiority in complaint. Most people don't complain because they are weak. They complain because they believe they're right. And in that belief hides a dangerous illusion. The illusion that complaining is a sign of awareness, of intelligence, of higher standards. But complaining is not a badge of wisdom. It is often a mask for the ego. There is a kind of complaint that does not sound like whining. It sounds noble. It sounds like justice. It sounds like someone trying to correct the world. But behind this performance of virtue is often a deep hunger to feel superior. not to help, not to heal, but to prove that you know better. And that illusion is what makes it so dangerous, because it doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like power. You complain about the behavior of others because you believe yours is better. You complain about society because you assume your values are higher. You complain about your circumstances because you think your destiny was meant to be more. And you speak these things not as questions, but as judgments. You don't seek understanding. You seek confirmation. The ego does not complain to correct, it complains to signal, to announce itself, to place itself above. But in doing so, it reveals something else. That it needs others to be wrong in order to feel right. That it needs the world to be broken in order to feel whole. That it draws strength not from discipline, but from contrast. And when that becomes the norm, something in you changes. You begin to build a life around what you reject. You feel clear only when pointing at what's dirty. You feel kind only when accusing what's cruel. You feel awake only when criticizing what's asleep. But it's a fragile clarity, a shallow kindness, a borrowed awakening. Because the moment no one is there to offend you, no one to disagree with, no one to oppose, you feel lost. You need something to push against, or else you don't feel like yourself. That is not a principle. That is dependency. The Stoics taught that real strength is silent. It does not need to announce its wisdom. It does not seek an audience for its judgments. It corrects what it can. It accepts what it must. And above all, it keeps its eyes on what is in its control, not to escape responsibility, but to preserve energy for what matters. To complain as a way of feeling morally superior is to believe that the louder you point at the broken parts of the world, the more whole you become. But this is not healing. This is vanity dressed as virtue. You do not become more disciplined by exposing the laziness of others. You do not become kinder by exaggerating the cruelty of the world. You do not become freer by mocking those still trapped. If your clarity only exists in contrast to others, then you do not have clarity. You have dependence. The truly wise do not complain about fools. They build lives so full of meaning that foolishness becomes irrelevant. The truly strong do not attack the weak. They carry their strength quietly, using it to build, not destroy. The truly noble do not chase virtue in the form of outrage. They find it in restraint. So ask yourself, who are you without complaint? Who are you when there is no one to blame, no one to criticize, no one to prove wrong? Can you still stand tall, silent, and anchored in truth? Because that is where real power lives. Not in the noise of judgment, but in the stillness of example. The ego seeks to feel above. The soul seeks to feel aligned. And complaint, disguised as righteousness, is the most seductive trap of all, because it makes you feel awake while you're still asleep. Wake up. The Whisper War. How micro-complaints sabotage your self-respect. Not all complaints are spoken. The most dangerous ones never leave your mouth. They stay inside, like fine dust that settles in the corners of the mind, barely visible, always present. You sigh, not out loud, but inside your chest. You roll your eyes at someone, not because they've wronged you, but because it makes you feel above them for a moment. You feel tension in traffic, frustration in silence, boredom in routine. And before a single word is said, your nervous system has already begun to rot from within. These are the micro-complaints, and they are everywhere. You complain about the slowness of the app, about the way someone walks in front of you, about the weather, about the coffee, about the delay, about the noise, about the silence. But not with full sentences, with shrugs, with clenched jaws, with shallow breathing, with that subtle resistance that tightens your chest but never speaks its name. You call it irritation, you call it mood, but what it really is disloyalty to the present. Every time you let that energy flow through your body without awareness, without accountability, you lose a little piece of yourself. You become more reactive, more fragile, less anchored. Your internal atmosphere begins to shift toward tension, judgment, and rejection. And the worst part? You start to believe that's normal, that this is just how life feels. But that's not life. That's life seen through the cracked lens of a mind at war with everything. The Stoics weren't obsessed with silence for nothing. They knew that the loudest noise is often internal, that a man can appear still but be in flames on the inside, and those flames don't start with rage, they start with sparks, micro-complaints, tiny judgments, half-second rejections of reality, one after another, until the whole structure becomes brittle. You cannot build a strong mind with weak bricks, and these whispers are weak. They are lazy. They are the mental equivalent of leaving trash on the floor because it's small enough to ignore. But enough of that, and you no longer live in a temple, you live in a dump. Self-respect is not just about how you treat yourself in moments of crisis. It's how you treat your own thoughts when no one is watching. It's whether you allow your inner world to become a hallway of groans and sighs. Whether you permit your energy to be spent hating the unavoidable. Whether you tolerate your mind becoming a critic of everything and a master of nothing. Each micro-complaint is a betrayal of discipline. It tells your mind that it doesn't need to rise above. It just needs to resist quietly. That resistance seems harmless, but it spreads. It bleeds into your posture, into your tone, into your decisions. You start to hesitate more. You start to snap at things that don't matter. You start to lose clarity, not because life is unclear, but because your lens is smudged with every sigh you never questioned. And then you look in the mirror and feel tired, not from effort, but from noise. So stop asking yourself only what you said today. Ask what you tolerated in silence. What did your body complain about without words? What tension did you allow to build, not because it was useful, but because it was familiar? What did you resist not with strength, but with subtle resentment? Your discipline doesn't collapse in loud explosions. It leaks through cracks you didn't seal. And most of those cracks are moments you didn't think mattered. They do. The next time you feel a sigh rise, don't suppress it. Observe it. Ask it what it wants. Ask it who trained you to respond like this. And then, instead of letting it drift into your chest and poison your calm, breathe deeper. Choose stillness. Choose presence. Choose command. You will not win this war with one grand declaration. You win it by noticing the whispers and refusing to follow them. Peeling off invisible layers of the self-inherited patterns, the complaints you don't know are not yours. You think you're complaining, but often you're just repeating. Repeating what you've heard since childhood. Repeating what society rewards. Repeating patterns you never examined. You speak with your own mouth, but the voice behind the words isn't always yours. Most people never pause to ask where their complaints come from. They assume frustration is personal, that discomfort is unique, that their resistance is original. But look closely, and you'll see that many of your reactions are echoes, passed down, absorbed, copied. You watched your parents curse the traffic, and now you do the same. You heard co-workers belittle their routines, and now you follow their rhythm of discontent. You sat through years of subtle scorn at politics, at work, at relationships, and now your thoughts default to criticism before they ever taste gratitude. A child raised among the bitter often becomes bitter before knowing what sweetness feels like. And unless you inspect your mind with intensity, you'll keep dragging their pain as if it were your own. There's no shame in having absorbed complaint. The mind is porous. It takes in what surrounds it. But once you know this, responsibility begins. You cannot call yourself free while being governed by scripts you didn't write. You cannot seek wisdom while hosting voices that have never been questioned. That's the first step, noticing the script. The second step is even harder, detaching from it. When you begin to question your complaints, you'll find resistance. The brain will fight back, not because the pattern is true, but because it's familiar. Familiarity feels safe. Even if it's toxic, even if it's weakening you, you'll justify your tone, you'll find evidence to prove your annoyance is rational. But reason isn't always the test. The real test is, does this reaction serve who I want to become? Inherited complaints come disguised as instincts, but they are not your instincts. They are training, conditioning, background noise absorbed so many times that it now plays on repeat in your nervous system. And some of these complaints are old, decades old. Some go back generations. Unconscious cultural programming. Emotional language passed through families like heirlooms of pain. you think you're reacting to now. But you're not. You're reacting through a filter that was installed long before you had the chance to choose. Stoicism was never about emotional suppression. It was about awareness, lucidity, being able to stand in the middle of the chaos and say, "This is mine, this is not." That kind of clarity doesn't come from reading quotes. It comes from confrontation with your past, with your habits, with the voices you still carry. You may realize that some of your favorite complaints are borrowed identities. The way you mock your job, borrowed. The way you belittle your relationship, borrowed. The way you speak about your own body, borrowed. You are renting the voice of someone who lost the war within themselves, and you've paid that rent in silence, in tension, in delay. But you can stop. You can return what isn't yours. You can begin the process of speaking only what you mean, thinking only what aligns, choosing your words not as reflex, but as expression of your highest standard. It will feel strange at first, like walking without armor, because the old complaints gave you something, a shield, an excuse, a tribe, but none of that equals freedom. Freedom is expensive. You have to give up everything you didn't choose. And when you do, something subtle begins to change. You no longer look for someone to echo. You no longer need validation to voice your calm. You stop joining conversations that feed on complaint, not because you're better, but because you're done. Done with mimicry, done with hand-me-down pain, done with living in rooms filled with voices that are not your own. You don't need to be loud, you need to be original. You need to speak with the voice that lives under all the noise, the one you were born with, the one shaped by silence, not by noise. And when that voice returns, complaining becomes unnecessary. Because now you're not reacting through others, you are finally responding as yourself. A philosophical slap that demands action. Why the universe doesn't respond to complaints, only movement. You can scream into the sky. You can whisper your frustrations to the walls. You can type 1,000 messages, craft the perfect rant, raise your voice, clench your fists, rehearse your grief over and over again. But the world won't stop spinning. The sun won't dim. The tide won't reverse. Life is not listening to your complaints. It never was. The universe does not respond to noise. It responds to motion. You've been trained to believe that expression equals progress, that venting clears the mind, that if you just speak it enough, something will shift. But repetition is not transformation, and complaint is not a strategy. It is a substitute for movement. The Stoics knew this long before science confirmed it, that the mind, when left in loops, becomes its own prison. Action is the only tool that reshapes reality. Not thought alone, not feeling alone, but movement, directed by will. So many people stay stuck, not because they lack strength, but because they worship their frustrations more than they trust their ability to act. They think if they just complain well enough, someone will intervene, that if they hurt out loud, something outside will hear and fix it. But life is not a savior. Life is soil. It grows what you plant, what you water, what you move toward. The tragedy of complaint is not just that it's loud, it's that it's still. It consumes energy that was meant for motion. It turns fire into smoke. It gives you the illusion of response while keeping your feet cemented in the same place. Every time you complain instead of act, you reinforce the story that you are powerless. And that story becomes architecture, a mental structure where walls are made of excuses and ceilings of imagined limits. You walk in circles, decorating your prison with new complaints but never breaking a single lock, because that would require movement, and movement is uncomfortable. It demands cost, risk, vulnerability. It requires you to leave the comfort of discontent and step into the terrain of uncertainty. But the moment you act, even a single step, the entire relationship with your mind begins to shift. You stop being the one waiting. You stop being the one narrating. You become the one responding, choosing, building. The complaint becomes irrelevant because clarity returns when your body aligns with your will. You don't need the world to hear your pain in order for healing to begin. You need to take one step forward, any step, and make that step a declaration. not of control, but of presence. The most dangerous lie complaint whispers is, you have to feel different before you move, but the truth is the opposite. Movement changes how you feel, not the other way around. If you wait for your emotions to shift before you rise, you'll rot in place. But if you rise despite the weight, despite the resistance, something ancient stirs in your nervous system, the memory that you are built for adaptation, built for storms, built for evolution. Don't expect silence from the world in response to your words. Expect change only in response to your movement. Get up earlier. Say no when you mean it. Train your body. Clean your space. Speak only what you would act upon. Choose one thing that resists chaos and do it with precision. The world will not applaud, but your mind will begin to trust you again. And that trust, that quiet, unshakable certainty, is worth more than sympathy. You are not here to be heard. You are here to build something so true that noise becomes irrelevant. So stop asking for a response. Start giving one, an intimate confrontation with the hidden self. The seduction of collapse. Why complaining becomes identity. There's a point where complaint stops being about the world. It stops being about discomfort, injustice, or difficulty. It becomes something else, something far more dangerous. It becomes you. Not just something you do, something you are. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It's gradual, like erosion. At first, you're just frustrated. Then, over time, the complaint becomes familiar. Then habitual. Then necessary. Until one day, without realizing it, you can't go a full morning without resenting something. And that resentment becomes part of your rhythm, like coffee, like breathing. And here's where it gets darker. That rhythm starts to offer comfort. Because collapse is seductive, there's a strange kind of relief in surrendering to frustration, a false peace in giving up the fight to rise. Complaining lets you collapse with dignity, or so it seems. You get to feel like you're resisting something, even as you surrender to it. That's why people stay in the same story for years. They call it pain, but it's actually identity. They don't just complain about the job. They are the one always stuck. They don't just complain about people. They are the one always betrayed. They don't just complain about how hard life is. They are the one who never gets a break. Take that identity away, and they panic. Because underneath it, they don't know who they'd be. The problem isn't just emotional, it's existential. If you've built your sense of self around a struggle, your ego will protect that struggle like a throne. If you heal, who will you become? If things improve, what will you talk about? If you stop being the victim, what will justify your silence, your delays, your shrinking? This is the hidden cost of long-term complaint. Not just wasted time or poisoned thoughts, but the erosion of self. You become smaller to fit the story. You shrink to match your pain, and worse, you start resisting the very things that could free you, because freedom would mean losing the narrative you've repeated 1,000 times. It's not that you enjoy the suffering, it's that it gives you something to hold, something stable, something known. But that stability is a cage. You were not made to rehearse pain. You were not built to anchor your worth in hardship. You are meant to evolve. But evolution requires loss, especially the loss of identities that once kept you safe. The Stoics didn't avoid pain, but they never became it. They experienced injustice, betrayal, exile, death, but they didn't make those things their name. They remained intact. Because they refused to collapse into their emotions, they let the storm pass through, but they never became the storm. So ask yourself, what are you still holding on to because it gives you identity? What complaint would you have to release if you were no longer afraid of becoming someone new? This is not about guilt, it's about recognition. Because once you see it, once you see how you fused your self-image with your wounds, you can begin to separate again. You can begin to say, that happened. It shaped me, but it does not define me. You can mourn the old story, then burn it. And from the ashes, something else can emerge. Not a new performance, but your real form. One that doesn't need to be the most hurt to be heard. One that doesn't need to collapse to feel loved. One that can exist with strength and presence, even when the story is over. Complaining isn't just a symptom, sometimes it's a disguise. for grief, for fear, for unspoken needs. But if you stay in it too long, it becomes your skin. Shed it, even if it's painful, especially if it's painful, because the pain of shedding is temporary, but the pain of pretending is eternal. And you were not born to pretend. Reframing complaint as excess and silence as mastery, complaint as emotional gluttony, and the discipline of restraint. Imagine a man who never stops eating. Every hour, more sugar, more salt, more volume, not because he's hungry, but because the act of consumption gives him something to do. He doesn't realize that his appetite isn't physical, it's emotional. That food has become a distraction, a substitute for meaning. Now change food for feelings. Now imagine this man doesn't binge on sweets, he binges on complaints. That man is most of us. Because complaint, too, is consumption. It's not about solving anything. It's about feeling, about stimulation. It's about tasting a sharp emotion, bitterness, frustration, self-pity, and letting it fill your mouth until your thoughts are numb. You don't complain just to be heard. You complain to feel alive. That's the hidden hunger, the craving for intensity. And complaint delivers. It spikes the heart rate. It fuels the ego. It gives a sense of urgency in moments that are otherwise dull. You're not passive anymore. You're reacting, resisting, fighting back. It feels like strength, but it's not. It's indulgence. And like all indulgence, it has a cost. The more you allow yourself to react to everything, the more sensitive you become. The more you feed that appetite, the more it grows. Your tolerance for discomfort shrinks. Your ability to sit in silence fades. Your emotional metabolism weakens. Soon, the smallest inconvenience sets you off. A look, a word, a delay. Not because it's unbearable, but because you've trained yourself to react. And what's worse, you think this reactivity is honesty. You think it's authenticity. But it's not. It's a loss of command. A Stoic does not seek to suppress feeling, but neither do they consume it without discernment. They treat emotion like a force, powerful but volatile, useful but not sacred. They don't allow their internal world to become a buffet of noise. They fast, they choose, they respond, but rarely indulge. Complaint is a form of emotional gluttony. It is an unchecked appetite, a desire to feel significant without doing anything significant. And over time, it destroys discipline, because no one can train themselves to complain and still expect to master their impulses. Restraint is not repression, it's selection. It's knowing that not everything you feel needs to be expressed. Not every reaction deserves your voice. Not every emotion should be served at the table of your attention. And this is where most people resist. They believe that silence means weakness, that not speaking the complaint makes you fake. But silence is not denial. It's refinement. It's a quiet recognition that this moment, this irritation, this emotional itch, it does not deserve to shape who you are becoming. Because you are always becoming, and every complaint is a vote cast in favor of a lesser self. Ask yourself, do I speak to elevate or to relieve pressure? Do I complain to clarify or to collapse? Do I use my voice to lead my life or to excuse my inaction? You can't live a sharp, deliberate life with a loose mouth. You can't build a noble identity on the back of constant reaction. And here's the truth, silence hurts at first. The first time you hold back a complaint, it will feel unnatural, like something is missing, like you're losing control. But what you're losing is not control, it's addiction. You are starving the part of you that wants comfort at all costs, and in its place, something cleaner grows. Strength without noise, presence without performance, depth without dramatization. It's not that you never speak. It's that you speak only when it builds, when it clarifies, when it commands. The rest, you let it burn, you let it die, because you no longer worship every emotion that passes through you. You sit still, you breathe, you act. You are not here to consume your feelings, you are here to use them. A tactical awakening of internal discipline, training the inner soldier, replacing complaint with command. Every time you complain, you're giving a silent order to your mind, and that order is simple. Lower the standard, Stop pushing, collapse into reaction, give power to discomfort, and the mind obeys, without question, without challenge, because it's been trained to follow the voice it hears most often, and for many, that voice is undisciplined, emotional, and weak. But there is another voice, deeper, sharper, quieter. It doesn't whine, it doesn't panic, it doesn't look for sympathy. It gives orders, clear, measured, unapologetic. This voice doesn't care if the moment is hard. It doesn't negotiate with laziness. It doesn't seek fairness, and it seeks alignment. And you were born with this voice, you just stopped listening to it. To find it again, you don't need noise, you need structure. That's the difference between a complainer and a commander. One reacts to emotion, the other gives direction in spite of it. When the morning begins and you already feel behind, the complainer says, "I can't today." The commander says, "Start anyway." When someone offends you and your ego lights up, the complainer says, "They're the problem." The commander says, "Hold your frame." When the outcome doesn't go your way, the complainer searches for someone to blame. The commander recalculates and continues the mission. This is not about being robotic. It's about being reliable. Inside yourself, you train this voice the same way a soldier is trained, through repetition, through posture, through breath, through the refusal to let temporary discomfort define permanent character. You do not wait for motivation. You act without it. You do not wait for peace. You build it through movement. You do not need to feel like a commander in order to give commands. You simply give them, and you follow them, especially when the complaint begins to whisper. Because that's the real test. It's easy to command yourself when the room is quiet, when things go right, when you're rested. But the inner soldier is built in chaos, in noise, in the moments where everything inside you wants to shrink, explain, or delay. The moment you replace complaint with command, you stop asking the world for permission. You stop waiting for clarity. You stop needing comfort to act. You take a breath. You center the body. You correct the posture. You lock your gaze on what must be done, and you do it. Without the extra sentence, without the emotional rehearsal, without the drama. That is the mark of internal maturity. Execution without unnecessary narration. The Stoics lived like this because they understood one thing clearly. Emotion is data, not destiny. You listen, but you do not obey it blindly. You acknowledge fear, but you don't follow its orders. You feel the complaint rise, and instead of indulging it, you use it. You let it become the signal to rise straighter, move faster, speak less. This is not natural. At first it feels mechanical, cold, even harsh. But that's only because you've been trained by comfort, and comfort has made you soft. But discipline sharpens. It refines. It recalibrates your entire nervous system to move with intention, not impulse. You are no longer a passenger in your own life. You are the one issuing the orders, not to others, to yourself. And the result is subtle, but profound. You begin to respect yourself again, not because of what you achieve, but because of how you show up, how you act when no one is watching, how you command your mind when it wants to slip into softness, how you lead your body when it wants to vanish into the shadows of complaint. You no longer explain your life, you live it. And that is the difference between noise and command, between reaction and power, between who you were and who you are now becoming. The elegance of silence, becoming the one who no longer needs to complain. There is a moment in every journey where the need to explain, to justify, to protest, fades, not because the world changed, not because the chaos disappeared, but because you did. You reach that moment not through victory, but through exhaustion, not through winning arguments, but through losing your appetite for them. You wake up and realize the world is still imperfect, people still disappoint, circumstances still resist your plans, and yet there's nothing left in you that wants to react. You've seen what complaint gives: a brief release, a taste of righteousness, a flicker of control. And you've also seen the cost, the erosion of your presence, the shrinking of your focus, the quiet disintegration of your own power. So you stop. not out of bitterness, not out of passivity, but because there is something more powerful than noise, silence, chosen silence. Not the silence of fear or suppression, the silence of clarity. You understand now the one who complains is still tethered to expectations, to emotion, to an imagined version of how life was supposed to be. But when you let go of that version, you also let go of the protest. There's a strange freedom in watching something go wrong and feeling no need to narrate it, no need to make it dramatic, no need to make it about you. You observe, you adjust, you act, you move forward. And in that movement there's grace. You're not cold, you're not detached, you are simply not trapped. Your peace no longer depends on the world agreeing with your preferences. Your inner climate is no longer hostage to outer events. You are steady. And that steadiness is not boring, it's sacred. There will still be moments that sting, moments that press against your chest, moments where the old habit of complaint returns like a shadow. But you will notice it, you will breathe. You will stand still inside yourself and let it pass, like wind brushing against a mountain. Because now you are not reacting to every breeze. You are rooted. So here's your challenge. Go one full day, just one, without speaking a single complaint. Notice the impulse, breathe deeper, and choose silence instead. And when you do, notice what shifts inside you. If something in this video resonated with you, share it in the comments. What kind of complaint are you ready to let go of? I read everyone, and if you're ready to go deeper on this path of clarity, strength, and self-command, subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. Until next time.